with you. Oopsie.
Yeah, I believe Carlos is going to drive the PowerPoint.
All right. Okay, so I think it is 3:01 Mountain Standard Time. I always like to honor time. So we are going to get started. I'm just going to do a little introduction and then I will pass this off to you folks. Look at all of that delicious, colorful food. All right. So welcome everybody. We are honored that we have two, not one, but we have two guest speakers that are joining us for Innovate BC. So, our webinars are really about building capacity, knowledge sharing, listening to the story. And we're just delighted. We're honored that we have Ryan Wright and Carlos Santos with us. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the goodness in creators world. So my name is Michelle. I'm joining from Amiskwaci, Waskagan, Edmonton Treaty 6 territory. And let me tell you, last week, I thought we were entering in the spring season, like give me my spring clothes. And then yesterday, well, actually Sunday night, we got the Mother Earth. She came with the snow. So it feels like it's back to winter. It was a -19 today, but it was good. So I went for a little walk this afternoon outdoors and just was reminded about, the goodness, the gifts that Creator has given to us to walk well in this world. So I just always think it's important just to take a moment, press pause, in the middle of our day, just to acknowledge the gifts, the goodness that is all around us, that the gratitudes, if you will, that we feel thankful in our hearts. So just taking that moment to give thanks to Creator for the gift of another day, another opportunity that we get to meet here. We get to learn, we get to be inspired, we get to listen to some good stories, some good knowledge that's being shared. So we just give thanks to Creator for the gift of another day and everything else that has brought us in this day. The sun is shining. It woke me up. Sometimes we hit that afternoon slump. So it woke me up and I'm ready to listen to our two guest speakers. So today's conversation is more than food security, promoting economic opportunity through indoor growing. So looking forward to the both of you sharing your knowledge with us, telling us a little bit about what you're doing, what you got going on. And they're from NuLeaf Farms. So Ryan Wright and Carlos Santos, thank you for being with us. And I'm just passing this virtual mic off to you. So bring the knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I think I'll lead the conversation. Carlos, maybe if you want to drive the PowerPoint, feel free to chime in. Feel free to do it. Thanks everybody for having us here today. As mentioned, my name's Ryan Wright. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO at a Calgary-based company, NuLeaf Farms. NuLeaf has a bit of an interesting story. Today, what we're all about is essentially delivering food security through economic development and environmental stewardship, of basically combining, plant science and modern day technologies to enhance our communities. Carlos, will get you to kind of bump that along. So how did NuLeaf start and come about? Oh, sorry, a little bit of an introduction. Yeah, well, so I'm going to talk a bit about the story of us. Some of the partnerships, different project models that we design and build into these communities, the impact and opportunity that has. With us, we're near and dear is rural development to our heart. So we're going to spend a bit of time talking about that. I thought we'd maybe look at some of the typical project and kind of the financial components of that and what that looks like for all the participants involved. And then, outcomes, or we'll have a final kind of Q&A. So if you guys have questions, happy to answer them as we go along. So with respects to about NuLeaf, so how did we really get here? Myself, three partners, we actually came out of the energy sector. So we specialized in process control and automation, basically nerd stuff for yeah, I mean, I built projects around North America for about 20 years prior to doing getting involved in this type of a business. Why did we get involved in this business? Well, there's an awful, it didn't take a lot of foresight to see that the world's really struggling with how it's going to feed itself going forward in the future. And we heard a lot of talk here in Calgary around the need for economic diversification. And we didn't really see a lot of that happening on the ground level. So myself and two partners, we decided to throw our hats in the ring, and instead of just saying we need this, let's actually start developing solutions. So we developed our own hardware, software, user interface, basically from the ground up. So we went through that phase in our lives where you look like crazy entrepreneurs in a garage until we came up with something that we liked. Fast forward to just a couple of weeks before the pandemic, we moved into about a 10,000 square foot operation here in Calgary, where we built our technology. One thing we found is as the pandemic was on and we were basically locked in our new building and building our technology, is that when the pandemic cleared, the inflation really took off, and we started getting approached by different companies, organizations, community groups, even just consumers looking for ways that they could reduce their food costs and become more independent of the traditional supply chain. So it was at that point we really focused NuLeaf into the concept of we're growing farms more so than just growing the produce. So this facility we use, and you can see it in our backgrounds. It's just one of the types of technologies we have here. But we really focused on how do we use this as a center of excellence to be able to bring in technologies, whether we develop ourselves or other technologies from around North America. We tested for economic viability, crop nutrition, applications, and if it's good, it just becomes a tool in our tool basket. And if it's bad, well, none of you guys will hear about it, and it doesn't get to make the PowerPoint. So with that in mind, our business essentially, we design, build, and install and support indoor farms for a pretty wide range of applications. So those can be anything from food banks to restaurants, senior centers, all the way up to remote communities, remote work camps. So it's a pretty wide range of uses. And a lot of people always think of indoor farms just from the aspect of growing food. But what we've really found is we have kind of three major buckets, if you will. Obviously, the food crops are one of them. Another one is indigenous plants, mainly used for reclaiming. Farmland is a big driver right now, but where industry has been. And then the third, and probably most relevant due to the drought conditions, I'm sure you guys have as well, but certainly acutely felt in Alberta, is animal feed systems. So growing feed for cattle, sheep, chickens, which we'll get a little more into as we go along. Next slide, Carlos. So why do we do it? Well, at the end of the day, the value proposition around indoor farming is if it's done right, you can be looking at anywhere from a 90+% reduction in farmland, water usage, transportation, fertilizer. Almost every one of these operations have been able to eliminate the use of any chemical sprays or pesticides in it. By producing the food locally, and this is often overlooked, is we're able to reduce the food waste because we're harvesting the same day it goes to the market, or that our customers take it to market. And it just extends how long it lasts in everybody's fridge. And we've all been there where you go to the grocery store, you buy some fresh greens, and then seems like the next day it's all gone south and you throw it out. So that's a real problem in the sense of not just burning a hole through all of our wallets, but when we talk about greenhouse gases and we talk about the environment, one of the things that's often overlooked when those things are brought up is the contribution food waste has to GHG. So food waste isn't a big emitter of CO2, but when it breaks down, it is a massive emitter of methane gas. And methane gas, depending on whose literature you're reading, anywhere from 18 to 30 times more destructive than CO2 in the environment. And there's so much food waste that goes on in kind of the Western developed world. That if we looked at, I'm sure everybody's seen, by country, who's the biggest greenhouse gas emitter. If we looked at food waste exclusively, it would actually be the second largest contributor to greenhouse gases in the world. So, it's a real problem. So by being able to produce it locally, we're able to extend the shelf life, typically about 400%, meaning that, people get a higher quality food, more nutritious food, and we combat the GHG scenario. Food security, pretty self-explanatory. There's especially in remote communities nowadays, the cost of getting this into those communities is completely prohibitive. It then leads to, compromised diets. So we think there's an opportunity where, or we know there's an opportunity where we produce that food locally year round, and we're able to combat a lot of the food security issues in different areas. And that, indoor farms, everybody always thinks of as leafy greens, but you can do a wide range of things. We do a lot of work around, strawberries or peppers and cucumbers, and sometimes it's not as cool and space age looking as my background. Sometimes it can be simple as potato bags in a remote community, because that's what the local group eats, and that's what they need produced, and that's doable. Well, what does this all equate to? At the end of the day, this equates to economic opportunity being created within the community. So, it's really important for us to make sure that these operations are profitable on their own, but that it's also creating jobs, local jobs in the community. We think, one of the big challenges in agriculture as a whole is the average age of a farmer in Canada is about 60 years old. It is a young person's game, make no doubt about it. But the youth can't afford the dollars it takes to get into ag now. I mean, if you don't have a couple $1,000,000, you might as well forget it. Whereas indoor agriculture, we can bring the farms right to the consumer base that's going to eat it. It's tech enabled, so we're not just talking about growing something in a garden anymore. Now there's a lot of automation, instrumentation, engineering, plant sciences, all rolled in along with entrepreneurship and running a business. So this creates a number of different opportunities for the youth to be able to engage into farming and revitalize our communities at the same time. Next slide, if you don't mind there, Carlos.
Are you just going to touch a little more on, or did you on economic development? And I'll just add one point, Ryan, and you can elaborate.
Sure.
One of the exciting thing has been some of the conversations we've had with communities. Communities have often come in and talked about food security for northern communities where you have ice roads or things can only be flown in, or even communities that are just far from cities. But the interesting conversation that's evolved is on the economic opportunity, the last box, and some of the things that came out of those discussions, like communities that said, hey, there's road work going down and we can sell remediation plants. We can do extracts from the plants and make bars of soap and brand it with a community brand and create some jobs in the community, or do training. So to hear the creative ideas that come out of the conversations from the community, things that we'd never thought of but are happy to help elaborate and develop, that's been really exciting.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a point worth mentioning. I mean, I always love the soap story where there's a community that's basically completely off the beaten path. It's fly only for the vast majority of the year. They had a food security component that was an issue, obviously, to deal with. But when the plane leaves, it was always leaving empty. So we've done a lot of work at our facilities where we have different plants. We have ways that we can stress those plants to produce different, in this case, they're looking for anti-inflammatory properties. Then we teach them how to do the extraction. They actually do the extracts on site. They process that into soap and shampoos, brand it, and then when the plane leaves, they're able to put a bunch of shelf-stable, high-value goods. $30,000 worth of goods on an airplane. It's distribution lines, and then boom, they're out. So now they're actually creating opportunity in the community that way. So there's a question there, Michelle. Oh, sorry, that was a clap. I'm old. It all looks like a hand up to me.
Are there any questions before we move ahead?
Perfect. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. So, what NuLeaf brings to the table, at the end of the day, and this is we really look for partnerships in the communities. We want to make sure that there is a strong economic case for the group right away, and there's a clear path to market. We definitely have by now we've been doing this. Well, I've been doing this for 8 or 9 years. So there's certainly a plant science and technology kind of merge. I mentioned earlier how we vet these technologies, they become tools in the tool basket. And the reason we approach it that way is when communities or businesses and organizations approach us, we don't want to have a single solution that we're trying to shoehorn into every application. We want to understand what's the local dietary needs, what's the skills gap, what's the existing infrastructure available, how much do we need to grow on a weekly basis, and what are the limitations around that. And from there, that really shapes a lot of the design and the type of technologies that have an impact. I often say to people, just because you can automate doesn't mean you need to automate things. And one thing we found in the bigger indoor farm models is, the investor component of it gets a little carried away with the flashy, blinky lights and some of the cool stuff and robotics. But the reality is, if we want to make these business profitable, we want to create the local jobs. It's all about a proper balance between the two. And it's one thing to read a Google paper. It's another thing to have a facility like we've stood up to be able to test and prove those models. And then on top of it, we're able to teach people how to actually operate these facilities instead of just dropping off a project. Here's the documentation, the skills, and the training needed to take them from A to B. We do try to deliver everything in a turnkey operation as well. Now we'll do, we have our own modular buildings. We'll retrofit greenhouses. We'll retrofit existing spaces. It's all at the end of the day led by what's best for the community and what makes the most sense and value to them specifically. Carlos, I'll get you to, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just add and again, we might elaborate a little bit on this later, again, about meeting the needs of whatever the community is looking for. In some cases, communities are just trying to figure out what they need, what they want. So we've done advisory services where we can work with the community to understand, okay, these are the risks to food security, or these are the economic opportunities that could come out of farming. There's a lot of grants available for this kind of work, and we'll touch on those. But from beginning to end, from understanding what the potential could be, what the risks could be, to project delivery, whatever the community needs. And another anecdote that kind of stuck with me, we were working with one community on a grant, and it was for a little farm to provide a bit of food, but more to provide an education opportunity. And they saw it. This grant was specifically targeted, I think, at cultural retention and things like that. The community saw this as an opportunity for some of the traditional plants that were found in the wild that were now getting harder to find and wildcraft, that they could plant them in the wall. The elders could teach the youth, hey, this is what this flower was used for. This is how we grew it. This is how we processed it. This is a medicine that came out of it. And they felt that not only provided the educational opportunity, but also helped with identity and understanding more about the community's history. And they saw, positive health and mental health outcomes that came with that strong sense of community and identity. So that story always stuck with me as quite important. So,
yeah, it's important to mention that kind of front end, especially if the food security especially if it's a community-led project, more so than a pure business-led one, where you have to really assess where the value can lie. And sometimes, we'll do these assessments and either the risk is too high or it doesn't necessarily make sense for the community. And where the value lies there is, these things can, prices on these things can range. I mean, we have some operations and school stuff. It could be $500 all the way up to multi-million-dollar projects that we do. And The assessment up front can go a long ways in mitigating the risk. And in that case, the community was looking at spending about $500,000. They had budgeted for this project. And, we couldn't in good faith, tell them to proceed, right? It just wasn't there. And we wouldn't be able to do that if we didn't have that kind of consulting component. That's why we offer it now to basically all the community-led projects that, if we can save you a $500,000 mistake, let's do that. So
I'll add one more point. We've talked about the context of food and leafy greens. Another community that we were talking to, not just leafy greens, but food for the community, whatever that might be. Another community that we were talking to, a more northern community, was very interested, not in the leafy greens, but feed for animals, because grazing land was hard to find sometimes, or when there was drought, they had a herd, I think, of deer, and I'm not sure if they had bison.
Well, we're doing that one with the buffalo.
Yes, that as well.
So the community raises buffalo, and they have some spirit buffalo in there as well. And because of the drought, they're really strained on being able to afford the feed to keep the operation going. And we have a way that we take essentially barley grain, and in about 6 days, we'll take that grain and convert it to about 7 pounds for every pound of seed, we'll convert it to 7 pounds of feed over a course of 6 or 7 days. So in something, in that project, I think it's about a 2,000 square foot building, and we'll produce over 2,000 pounds a day, every day of animal feed at about a third of the price of what they were paying out in the market before. And what it did also is we need someone to train and be operating that. So I created a couple jobs in the community as well. And then it's actually moving them towards a grass finished market when they actually process the animals. And that leads to, turns out, a significant increase in value to what their output actually is. So it hit a number of different value propositions. Right now we see, excuse me, we see a lot of those feed projects where there's cattle operations. We're doing a lot of work with ranchers and livestock, even sheep now, just because the drought's gotten so bad that, in a 2,000 square foot building, we can produce basically the equivalent of about 200 acres of forage land. So you would need to have 200 acres of grazing land to keep these animals fed. We can stuff that in a 2,000 square foot box, and it's repeatable and it's consistent and available for them year round.
Yeah. So again, there's an economic opportunity here, but also for the community, but also, I guess, for some communities, a food sovereignty opportunity. If the food is, animals from the region, and having those herds local helps with that, these solutions can assist. I'll go to the next slide.
So project models, like we kind of touched base on here a little bit already. It really is it's community led. A popular one that we see right now too is a lot of old greenhouses out there. A lot of greenhouses that need retrofitting. The economics on the greenhouses generally ran down for one of two reasons. One is access to labor, so they're often done with like raised garden beds or these methods where we'll go in and with various technologies, we can basically increase the plant density generally about 20 to 30 times what it was before without having to actually expand the greenhouse. And a lot of that's done with walls like you see in that photo. And then there's a labor efficiency in using those walls. You don't have people bent over. You got increased growth and yield on this type of technology on the crops themselves. So that's a benefit. And the other big driver has been the cost of energy for the greenhouses. So specifically around heating them at night, natural gas prices have gotten up so high that a lot of these operations can barely hang on just to keep the operating going. So by increasing the plant density per square foot, they've been able to essentially shrink the greenhouse and increase the revenue which flips around the dynamics on their costs pretty significantly as well. Now, with project models, there's a couple ways to look at it. We have some people that put these farms in because they are restaurant owners or they operate a food bank, and they're trying to reduce their internal input costs or feed costs. We have obviously entrepreneurs that will start a business. They will grow high value crops to sell predominantly into restaurants, but also into retailers. I personally like the restaurant model more, just due to the consistency and the high volumes that you can take. And it's also a lot easier to get those contracts versus going to try to get into Save on Foods, right? So it's more attainable that way. And then what's growing in popularity and probably the most lucrative for that entrepreneur is a direct to consumer model. So in these models, they're growing a wider range of crops. They'll grow, sure, they're leafy greens, they'll have some herbs, they'll grow some beans or cucumbers, and they create a basket of products. People subscribe to that basket once a week. They're picked up or they're delivered, and there's these high value boxes of a nice range of produce, and the entrepreneur community is able to charge retail prices or just below typically, and capture a lot of the margin that would otherwise be given up relying on big conventional supply chains. When we talk about remediation, like Carlos had mentioned, it's a pretty slick model if you're in the right area. You can grow some of these indigenous plants and native plant species for a couple bucks, and they'll be sold to industry, of the mining companies in the area, or someone's putting a road through. They're selling these for $8-9 a shot, so it's pretty lucrative. It's year round. It prevents people having to go out and actually. It sounds weird, but we've seen a couple cases where basically they go somewhere else and dig up the plants from one place, transplant them to another. Needless to say, that has its own problems, and this is a way to solve that as well. Traditional and medicinal plants and crops for nutraceuticals. That's getting into more like that soap, shampoos, salves. Basically, the idea where the growing is part of the operation, but then they take that, instead of just selling it to market, they value add this. So there's another part of the process where they convert it into another product, increases their revenue, increases their margins again, and then they take that to market. Huge fan of that. It always amazes me how much entrepreneurial drive. Like, there's new ideas every day where people have these things. They just need to be able to facilitate some of the costs in a year-round consistent production, and off to the races they go. So that's one that I'm always interested in. Anytime anybody calls looking for the value add a product. We even have one where they just simple pesto, right? You guys just basically exclusively grow basil. You make it into pesto, and they pump that into the big retailers. Next slide, Carlos. All right, so in here, and sorry, my screen, let's see if I can move this a bit. There we go. So just a high level overview. What you see in that one image is essentially a modular can. We make them tall, we make them wide, but the nice thing is we make them expandable. So oftentimes we'll have customers start out at a certain footprint. We generally like to start small and make sure they can sell everything and become successful. But then, as their business expands, you got to be able to expand with them. You got to be able to reuse all that other equipment efficiently. So in a module like that, we can actually take those walls down and bolt onto the structural steel and just build a factory out like Lego blocks. And inside that box is what's in my background right now. So that's behind Carlos. That's what's inside that box today. So looks big and industrial on the outside. It's rated to be able to go outdoors. And just a little factory, and easy to move in. They collapse down. Believe it or not, all of that fits in 2 sea cans basically for a structure perspective. So modular to be able to get the site as well. Inside that, yeah, we can grow inside that space. We'll grow about 6,000, 7,000 plants, depending on the type of technology you want to configure with it. It's typically between 1 and 2 jobs to do that, and you'll produce 75,000 plants a year. So even at wholesale, if you're selling through a middleman, yeah, 225 $250,000 a year in revenue, and on that, is typically about a 50% margin. So projects like this, from an investment perspective, they typically get their money out. Best case scenarios, you see, maybe close to 2 years. Average is probably close to 4 years, to give you some sense on that side. We did put a little thing to give you an idea on what is the impact in terms of the environment with something like this, right? So, assuming the 6,300 plants in that area, we'll save about 1.3 million liters of water. I'll get into that in a second, how that's done. It's growing the equivalent of about 3 acres of California farmland production a year, assuming, because in Canada, we have our seasons, but generally speaking, about 80% of our fresh produce, fruits and vegetables, are coming in from California. And it really comes out of 3 fields. Well, 2 in California, 1 in Arizona. But on average, you're saving about 7,700 kilometers of transport every year by growing it locally with one of these pods this size. You'll reduce the food waste by about 7,000 pounds. And then we get into like CO2 equivalent and transport. So this gets into your greenhouse gases and what we're actually doing for the environment that way. Interesting to note on the water. Everybody thinks of hydroponics in terms of its water savings because it's a closed loop, and that's true. One of the things that we developed on our end that's a bit unique and especially is important in drought-stricken areas is we're able to basically sense how that plant is shedding water to the outside environment, and we can control how fast that plant's growing, essentially. But then there's always a little too much water in the air, and we figure out how much that too much is. And this is all automated, and then it goes through. We figure out the dew point of the air, and as it moves through an HVAC, we actually cool the air to that temperature. The water condenses, the extra water, and falls out like rain in a box. Then we have sensors that make sure that water is okay. We don't want to put anything bad into it. We'll inject nutrients back into the water that the plants need, and then we'll feed it back to the plants again. And that actually makes up about 90% of our water usage. So. In drought-stricken areas, we can typically reduce the water consumption anywhere from 94.5% on average, which these days is more and more important. Typical ROI on these, 20 to 30%, depending on what you're growing, depending on what you're doing, it depends where you are. Like the more remote you are, the better these numbers get. So we always base our numbers on assuming you're in a highly competitive market, you're selling wholesale, and you're like in a big city. But excuse me, if you are in an area where some of the customers it's $9 for a head of lettuce, well, we'll still, even though it's higher electricity cost, we'll still produce that head of lettuce for $2. So the economics are actually significant. You can reduce the food cost to the community, but you can also, have a pretty handsome return on that. I think go to the next slide, Carlos. Sample project structure. So yeah, just how does this typically work? People will engage us and say, hey, I like the idea of indoor farming, or we have a food security issue, or we need education, whatever it may be. In that area, and we'll meet with them, consult, and kind of get our head around what a plan would look like. From there, it's defining, farm size, outputs, what makes the most sense from a model. And there's some models you can see on the right-hand side where, food, are you selling to the consumer directly, or food service, or medicinal? We go through those different models to see what makes the most sense and has the most value. There's typically 1 or 2 clear winners every time. So that's what you lean into. So then from there, we kind of design out the farm and look at what we're going to actually need for resources, people, power, water. We'll deliver that farm. So we'll do the design, build, install it. Then we provide the training. Some of that training might happen at our facilities. That training always happens at the beginning when we deliver the farm. But then we have the ability with our technology, not to ask going everyone, but we can monitor these farms 24/7, and that data streams back to our operation here in Calgary. So we have in-house plant scientists, engineers. They can look at what's going on the farm, and they can help the operator in real time without the operator having to have these expensive overheads sitting on their business. So and oftentimes the automation will catch the problem before the operator does, or the operator realizes it's a problem. And then all the information is logged, tagged. We can help optimize the facilities going forward in real time. That's kind of a neat approach, especially for remote areas. We also develop all the standard operating procedures. So again, like how you plant a seed to how you harvest, disease management, troubleshooting, integrated pest management strategies, all of that is built when we deliver the farm, and then the documentation is of course provided in the training. And then, like we said, the ongoing support. So one thing we also do is with our place, we're always testing new crops to see good, bad, or indifferent. If it is a good crop and they're viable, we can push those recipes and those formulas out to all of our farms, so that it's an option for all the other farmers out there to be able to continue to expand their businesses. The advice and consulting, like we spoke of, and then we also provide all the consumables. So everything that you're going to need to run the farm. Obviously, when we design the farm, we know what it's going to take to run the farm, and then we can just put it on a monthly subscription. We send that out, so all your nutrients or plugs or seeds or whatever you may need to keep you up and running. Once that's all defined, like Carlos mentioned, there's a lot of grant programs, different sources of capital. We'll help the group work through that, and then we get it financed. We go on, install, get it running, and then the fun really starts, and it's up and going from there. Carlos, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to. It's a busy slide, but I feel like I covered a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point being that there's a lot of models, there's a lot of funding, and we're supportive of the community and meeting their objectives. So, whether it's analyzing what they want to do, or sourcing the funding, or helping delivery, the whole scope. Yeah, and we've got partners that support us. For example, like there's a couple of engineering firms that we've partnered with when that's necessary, that we can do site work if necessary. But yeah, like it's turnkey to make sure it's simple and just ready to go.
Yeah, and I guess one of the only thing that really not captured in here that we do as well is we do some work around schools, again, for the education, just because we feel that we're focused on growing that next generation of farmers. So we do have programs specifically developed from K to 12, and it's typically broken up into K to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and up to 12. And in each of those brackets, we have different hardware solutions, different learning and curriculum aids. And we'll start off with the real basics for the young kids. We'll talk about the importance of sustainable agriculture. We'll talk about the roles that this plays in the community. But by the time we get to the later stages, we have packages where it's all done at a safe level for voltages and stuff. But maybe the kids, we can deliver a package where they're learning about automation, they're learning about engineering, they're learning so they can actually get in and interact with these components, interact with these things, and they get exposure to that knowledge base, all the way up to the point on the business side where these smaller systems, they'll take a deal either with a company that's bringing food into the schools or local restaurants. We'll teach them how to they'll go and get those deals, and then they learn how all the input costs, don't forget the tax man, all of this, and they learn essentially how to run a business from a profit and loss statement perspective. So the idea behind all of this is that whether they're interested in the plant science or engineering or any of this, we can use the lessons in sustainable agriculture and indoor farming to teach them different aspects that maybe if indoor farming is still not for them, these other components are they're getting exposed to other opportunities that are out there that are typically very STEM based and leads them to different career paths. And so, as much as it might break my heart if they don't want to become little farmers, at least they've gained the knowledge and the ability to better understand where their careers and opportunities lie out in the world when they start pursuing post-secondary opportunities. Project outcomes. Yeah, so basically we want, needless to say, we have to be able to address the nutrition and affordable food within the community. That's first and foremost. We want to always see not just the growth we created within that specific project, but where is the growth for the business going forward? How can we create more jobs in the community? How can we get more people on board? Typically, once guys are up and running with the first project, funding, different types of funding streams become available, and different corporate partners, all of that. So that's an important component for us to make sure that the project's supported, and then obviously protecting the environment, right? So we through the automation packages we have, we track a lot of the actual environment performance, so the water, the land, GHGs, and we collect that into a dashboard to make it, transparent to everybody about the positive effects that's having. And then, between the environment, the jobs, and the food, just a more holistic, better community. I mean, I sometimes a little inappropriate to say, but I do bring it up often that I don't think it's a surprise to a lot of people that the world's more or less a dumpster fire at points right now. And I think it needs the leadership of people like us to step up to the plate, and let's just start fixing it. And I think, not to say indoor farming is the be all and end all. I think it's a part of the puzzle that starts contributing to stronger communities. And I'm always happy to work with the leadership in different groups to bring that to fruition. Yeah, I think that's kind of the end. You guys are probably tired of hearing me talk for the last 43 minutes. So happy to take any questions. And hopefully, there's opened your eyes to some new opportunities here.
Wow, what a fascinating and thorough presentation. I feel like you really demonstrated how there is economic opportunity through this avenue. I think early on, I loved what you said. We're just some crazy entrepreneurs in a garage just trying to think about, solutions and what could possibly work. And, I live in Alberta, and the droughts, the concern of this year coming up, the drought, we've had a really dry winter. And so this listening to this presentation really feels hopeful for me. So there was a lot of good nuggets. I also loved how you brought in that youth engagement, because I think that piece is so important. Bringing education and knowledge about this perhaps new opportunity of food security, I think is really important. So it was really good. I had a whole bunch of notes that I wrote down, but we're going to open up the floor for any questions. And I saw in the chat box, Ken has a question. Is there a typical percentage breakout for the infrastructure cost prior to startup?
Typical percentage breakout for the infrastructure cost. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding that properly. Like, is that assuming, you have no building versus, say, a growth system, or if you have, say, an existing building, what kind of a percentage? Just maybe if Ken's on the call, just get a little more clarification on that. I mean, typically the infrastructure without the building is 50% of the cost as a round number, whereas your growth system and all that support equipment will be the other 50%. But I don't know if I'm really answering Ken's question there.
That answered it, because I was assuming there was no building yet, because assuming there was no building and you had to start from fresh, but you had the land but no building.
Yeah, so typically then if we're going to stick build it, and it'll vary a bit, like if you think about like a fodder project, for example, it's a bit different than like say growing food, and if we're using modular buildings, yeah, rule of thumb, generally speaking, about 50-50.
Now, a couple of options, like with the fodder projects, especially, like there's flexibility on building types anyway. Like if there's a
Yeah.
barn on site, for example, or an old building, or a basement of a building that's partially not used, or tension, like a sprung structure type building. Um, all of these can can change that location a little bit, but certainly we can help figure that out based on the need.
I had one more question. Do you ever use greenhouses, or is it always artificial lighting?
Nope, sometimes artificial lighting doesn't make sense, frankly, Ken. Or what's even more popular is sometimes greenhouses or artificial lighting represents part of the answer, because what depends on where the geographical location of the greenhouse is. Sometimes that shoulder season can be pretty nasty. There's not enough light getting through to really maintain commercial yields. So in those cases, we'll put supplemental lighting in, but we'll use the natural light to its benefit. Now, some crops are also very light hungry. So if you can get away with a greenhouse, that's the way you want to go, just because it'll help you that much more, right? Versus other things like when we do our barley feed, it really doesn't matter. There's such low power in the artificial lighting in those cases that you're splitting hairs. Probably costs more for the glass in the greenhouse than what the building itself is worth.
An interesting comment on the greenhouses, Ken. We've talked to customers that had greenhouses, but their challenge was because of the density that they've planted in there and the cost of heating the greenhouse, it became uneconomical. So what some of these systems allowed them to do is increase the density. So now instead of 1 or 2 plants per square foot, you can have 20 or 30. So in the same area, you have 20 times the productivity, you can sell a lot more. Alternatively, they could shrink the greenhouse in half and still have 10 or 15 times the production, heat a lot less, spend a lot less. So there's communities with these community gardens and greenhouse projects that sometimes have not been totally successful. And with some of those communities, we've talked about how some of these systems can assist.
What percentage of your installations would have hydroponics?
Oh, just about all of them. Yeah, there's not too many. Like even in and it depends, I guess, how you want to split the term hydroponics. But even if you think about, like, say you want to grow potatoes, right? Like potatoes, we're going to grow in soil, right? We're going to grow in soil bags, but we'll use a rather sophisticated like drip irrigation on it. Now, depending on what side of the agriculture fence you're on, you'll count that as hydroponics or not. But it depends on the crop. On the same point, like we're never going to advocate for growing lettuce without using hydroponics. And one of the things that needs to be accounted for in soil is always an interesting conversation, because if you look at the life cycle of your disease and pests, about 70% of all those critters, we'll call them, need soil at least in some part of their life cycle to sustain themselves. So maybe that's their adult stage, maybe that's larval stage. It can change, right? But they need soil. And the other component, though, to counter to that, is when we get into native plant species, especially plant species with cultural significance, soil is a huge part of what ties is this component of the land, right? So we do have systems where we'll integrate the soil as well. Sometimes it's directly like good old-fashioned dirt. Other ways that we can do it is you take the soil and we can create a thing called a tea, or a liquid tea. So you can basically get all the enzymatic properties and things like that out of the soil. You can run it in a liquid-based media, and then you can pump that through certain types of hydroponic systems to be able to deliver, that bacteria and basically what makes the earth good.
Thank you. I'll give somebody else a chance.
Thanks so much, Ken, for your questions and your curiosity. So we'll just, open up the floor for any more questions that there might be. I think one other piece that I found very fascinating was, let me see, I don't think I wrote the number down, but the amount of liters that was saved on water, like that blew my mind. Because for us, water is water is everything, and the concern about also that resource as well. So that statistic blew my mind.
Yeah, like even the room behind us, like, typically if you're running, like I said, the hydroponic systems just in their designs have some, just inherently better water efficiency. So in the room behind us, say, we'd be able to run that room for about 8 or 9 gallons of water an hour on the input. That would be growing, yeah, maybe like 7,000 plants, right? So that is still significantly better than what you would be watering through conventional means. However, with that water recovery tech, we can actually recover about 6 to 8 gallons of that water now and re-inject it back through. So yeah, at times we're down to a gallon and change an hour to drive thousands of plants, right? So it makes a big impact.
All right. Well, it doesn't appear that there's any more questions. You wowed us with your presentation this afternoon. It was very thorough. You covered a lot of ground. Again, I think it demonstrates what is possible. And so thank you so much for being here. Oh, there's Ken. One last question, Ken.
It's not a clap. This time it's the hand up. Okay.
I'm going into competition with you. For your soil, when you use soil, do you sterilize each season, or do you start with fresh soil all the time, or how do you?
Sterilizing, certain crops are going to be more susceptible than others, right? But you always got to start with sterile soil. Like one thing that has killed me in the past is seeing guys like think they can go outside and just dig stuff up, because that's a great way to just contaminate your whole facility, right? So you want to have a sterilization process up front. Now, you can buy it, sterilized, right? And then based on what type of crop you're growing will really dictate how often you need to look at it. And if you're doing soils like that indoors, it's not necessarily sterilizing it from like a pathogen perspective, but you also need to consider the depletion of nutrients in that soil over time. So oftentimes what you'll see is that you'll run low on your nitrogen or potassium before it's an actual contaminant issue with pest or disease. Excuse me. So yeah, hopefully that answered that question.
There's another question in the chat, Ryan. Do you do aquaponics?
So yeah, we do aquaponics. There's something that needs to be considered with aquaponics, and what it really boils down to. So you got fish, and those fish need to be in a high density, especially if you have a big farm. So there's a ratio between like fish and fish poop to plants. So at the end of the day, and when those plants, and that can be a high density, and when that happens, the fish can oftentimes get sick. And that's okay. Like you treat sick fish, but most fish medication is copper based. And when you use that copper, plants absorb copper at a blistering rate. So if you do that on a routine basis over time, you actually run the risk of toxicity, copper toxicity in the plant material. So yes, it can be done. Yes, we can do it. No, it's not as simple as just throwing fish in a tank, though. And so there's got to be a bit of an analysis done up front to make sure that you get those ratios right. There's also a way that you can decouple systems, but not all decoupled systems necessarily work the same either. So it's doable, but with a little bit of caution.
Right, there you go. Thanks, Tasha, for the question. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. Again, thank you to our guest speakers, Ryan and Carlos. Thank you for lending your time and dropping some good knowledge and sharing with us about what's possible. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the afternoon, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us. Take care.
Thank you.